In this video, we'll talk about component lifecycle hooks. Every programming has their own types of lifecycle hook, like React.js there has own, AngularJS has their own lifecycle hook. Similarly, Lightning Web Component has their own lifecycle hooks. And to become the master in the Lightning Web Component, you should have a great command on the lifecycle hooks. So let's understand first what is lifecycle hooks. So lifecycle hooks are the callback methods trigger at a specific phase of component instance lifecycle. So these are the method basically in the component that called at a specific level or at specific phase. So there are three types of phase in your component lifecycle. First is the mounting phase, second is the unmounting phase, and third is the error phase. So the mounting phase has four methods. First is constructor method, then the connected callback, then render method, and fourth one is renderer callback. And these are the four methods that gets called during the mounting phase. And you might think why I have highlighted the render method in yellow color, because there is a confusion between the people, like the render is not a lifecycle hook or it's a hook. Technically it's not a lifecycle hook, it's a protected method on the lightning element class, but people say this is a lifecycle hook. We are saying it's not a lifecycle hook, but it gets called, or it's a protected method on the lightning element class. We'll talk about this render method in a render method video. Okay, and then we have a unmounting phase. In that, whenever your component is removing from the DOM, that time this phase occur when you are removing a component basically. Okay, that has a one method disconnected callback, and there is the error phase. Whenever your any of the callback of lifecycle hook throws an error, you comes into a error phase, and to catch that error we use the error callback. We'll go through all the methods in brief in the upcoming video. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next video. In this video, we'll talk about lifecycle hooks in mounting phase. Mounting phase basically is a creation phase. As we already discussed, there are basically three main methods that gets called up during the mounting phase. First one is the constructor method, second is the connected callback, and third is the rendered callback. Before explaining you about these method, I want to show you the flow, how exactly the components loads and how the things works behind the scene. So if you look at this diagram or the flow chart, this is the exact way how the components or the how the lifecycle hooks gets called up. So suppose you create a component here. So as soon as your components start loading into the Salesforce engine or on the web browser, it first call the constructor method. Then once the constructor method gets called up, it will check whether the public properties are there to update or not. Public properties are nothing. These are the properties that where you assign your data. Okay. Then it gets called the it will check whether the component inserted into the DOM or not. And after that, it will call our second lifecycle hook, that is connected callback. So remember, first hook is constructor, then the connected callback. And once the connected callback is called, it check whether the component is rendered or not. And while the component rendering started, okay, after the connected callback, the component rendering started, it will see in the HTML, is there any child component in my component? If it says no, it calls our third lifecycle hook, that is rendered callback, and it ends the lifecycle hook. But if there is already a child component available, it will go down and it will go to the child component and it starts the same lifecycle again. There as well, it will say, okay, call your constructor, update your all public property, insert your component into the DOM, call the connected callback, start the component rendering, and again while rendering, it will check do I have another child component? If it's not, it will call the render callback of the child component, and then it will come back and it call the parent render callback. So you need to remember it. The render callback of the parent will only called once all the child components gets rendering completed. Okay. We'll see this in a practical example. I'll show you. This is the diagram that you need to understand. So you need to remember always the constructor is the first method that's called up. That time your public properties are not available as such. Then your second method is the connected callback, and the third method is the rendered callback. Okay, let's go and talk about each method one by one. So first we'll talk about constructor method. So if I say hook or a method, both are interchangeable here. Okay, so you need to remember these points. So this hook is invoked when a component instance is created. We already know what is constructor is. And you have to call the super method first inside this. So whenever you're creating a constructor method, you should have the super inside it. At this point, the component properties won't be ready. It means like as already we see in our diagram, the properties are ready, or the component properties are ready after the constructor method. Okay, so that time you can't access the property. And to access the host element, you can use this dot template. So whenever you want to do something on the whole component, you can use this dot template inside it. That time the this dot template is there, but the child will not be there, just remember. Okay, and nothing in the DOM as such, because it's not loaded the HTML into the engine or into the web page. And this method lifecycle flow from parent to child component, we already seen that in the flow diagram. We can't access child element in the component body because they don't exist yet. That's also we already know now, because the child component only checked once the component connected callback is done and the component rendering started. Okay, and don't add attribute to the host element in the constructor. So these are the points that you have to remember when you are creating the constructor method. So let's go to our VS Code and first create the constructor method. So let's first create the component, and I'll give this name Lifecycle parent, because I'm going to demonstrate you parent and child relationship as well in the lifecycle hook. So now my parent component is ready, and as I said, we are talking about the constructor method. To create the constructor method, you need to call constructor, create the method. So this is the normal function, but this is a keyword here, constructor. And as we discussed in our slide, it should call always a super. And this is the first method whenever the component loads that gets called up. Here you can access the this.template, but you can't query anything because there will be nothing in the HTML, even though if there is a div, suppose, okay, and this div has some class ABC. If you try to query it inside the selector, I'll use query selector, and if you try to call this class, that time your DOM is not ready, you can't query that. Okay, you can use only this dot template when you want to apply some listener at a component level, at a parent level. Okay, something like this. If you want add event listener on mouse over and you want to call that function, those sort of things you can do, but we very rarely implement this. Okay, these have some drawbacks as well if you implement. So I'll say simply console.log, and in the console.log I can simply say parent constructor called, parent constructor called. Okay, so whenever this component lifecycle gets called, it will print the parent constructor called in our console. And just for time being, when we place our component, let's add some card or our div margin that we are following from so long. So I have just created a card and given the heading lifecycle hook parent card, and I have given the margin. Nothing else is there inside this. Okay, and I have the constructor. Let's add the meta tags. So I'll make it true, and let's add our targets. And our target is lightning app page. So you already know this, and let's deploy this. And to deploy, you already know the command as well. So the command is sfdx force colon source colon push. Let's hit enter. So let's go to your scratch org and edit the page. I already create a app page. If you thinking like I haven't teach you, because we already know how to create the app page, you can create another app page with the lifecycle hook. And I have taken the two section layout. So let's edit the page and place our component. And if you search your component name here, you can see it. Drag it to the first section. Save this and let's go back. So now you can see our card is there. We just have added the header, and if you go to the console, right click and select inspect, select the console tab. Now you can see parent constructor called. So it called, and let's go to a slide back and see the second method now. So the second method is connected callback method, and one of the most commonly used method in LWC. So this gets called when the element is inserted into a document. This hook flow from parent to child similar to constructor method. You can't access the child element in the component body because they don't exist yet. We already know because you can access the child component only in the rendered callback that we'll see in a while. You can access the host element with the this.template. You can access here, you can use this.template. Access the child component only in the rendered callback that we'll see in a while. You can access the host element with the this.template. You can access here, you can use this.template element.query selector, and that time there may be a chance the element may not be rendered completely. Okay, so this is also not the right place to query the elements. But basically this method you can use whenever you want to call the service imperatively apex or something on load of the page or load of the component. We use it to perform initialization tasks such as fetch data, set up cache, or listen from events such as publisher or subscriber event. So these are the right place where you can add those things. Where we should not use it, to connected callback to change the state of a component. You should not change your state of the component such as loading value or setting properties. It's always recommend to use getter and setter instead of connected callback. So let's go and create a connected callback method as well. So I'm back in my VS Code. It's also a keyword, connected callback, call the method. And here I'll say parent connected callback called. And this method basically used to fetch the data from the server on page or the component loads. Okay, we'll see all this in real time when we start interacting with the apex basically. Okay, or start fetching the data from the Salesforce. That time these lifecycle hooks makes more sense. But right now I want to explain how the rendering order of this method. Okay, and when to use which method in which case. Okay, let's deploy this and the command. It's deployed. Now if I refresh, you can see the constructor method gets called first and the connected callback second. So if I zoom my console a little bit, now you can see first is the constructor, second is the connected callback. Let's go to our third method. So just remember from this method point of view, this method is used to perform initialization tasks such as fetch data, setup cache, or listen event. Okay, this is the important point here. So the third method that you're gonna use again heavily in some sense, but it's a dangerous method, I would say. If you'll not use it carefully, it slow down your component and it impact the performance as well. Okay. So this method fires when a component rendering is done. So once your component rendering completed, this method gets called up. It fire more than once. As I said, this is impacting the performance. It calls again and again, okay, whenever something change in the component. These hooks flow from child to parent. Till now, we have seen two methods, that is constructor and the connected callback. Both render or flow from parent to child. This method is come from child to parent. And when a component re-renders, all the expression used in the template are re-evaluated. So basically, whenever you change something, this render callback gets called up and everything, all the expression re-evaluated. When not to use render callback, do not use to change the state or update the property of the component. Don't update a wire adapter configuration object property in the render callback, as it can result into an infinite loop. Okay, so this is bit I would say like tricky callback, and you should know properly when to use it and when not to use it. Let's go and create this component. So right now we are just talking about the lifecycle mounting phase actually. Okay, so this is a render callback, and here also we'll print the console. You might thinking why I'm adding the console. It start making more sense when I introduce the child component. Okay, so now this is the child render callback, parent render callback. So let's deploy this as well quickly. Now we are just making sure the order of execution is correct or not. So first constructor will get called up, then connected callback, and third is rendered callback. So let's refresh the page. And in the console you can say first parent constructor, then parent connected callback, and then the rendered callback. Okay, and let's go and create a child component now, because we have to prove our this concept as well. Right now we are just going through the straight line where we don't have a child component. We have just called the constructor, we call the connected callback, and we call the rendered callback, and the component lifecycle ends. But now I want to introduce this thing. Oh, do you have a child? Yes, I have a child. Then again this lifecycle should work, and the render callback of child should call first and the parent second. Okay, so let's go back to our VS Code and create another component, that is life cycle child. And this child will just copy paste the all things as it is from JS file, because this also contains these methods, right? These are the lifecycle hooks, and these lifecycle hooks are by default available in each component. So I'll change it to child. So this child will render, and I'll take the HTML as well from the parent and paste it as it is, and say lifecycle hook child card. Okay, and now just now we have created the component, we haven't included the child component into the parent component. So let's add that as well into our parent components. So this is the child component. I want the child to be available in the parent component. So what I can do is I can embed inside or outside as well, anything is fine. So what I can say here, c hyphen, we all This is the child component. I want the child to be available in the parent component. So what I can do is I can embed inside or outside as well. Anything is fine. So what I can say here, C hyphen, we all